All right. Well, we are on part 3 of Growing Pains. And remember, the big idea here is if you want to grow, you have to push past pain. Push past pain. So, kids, and I'm going to say this again at the end, try to remember this, kids. Don't complain. Remember what God has done. Okay? Don't complain. Remember what God has done. That's what we're going to, kind of the spoiler alerts, what we're going to be talking about today. So, if you'll remember, everybody wants to grow. Growth is, everyone wants to do that. They want the church to grow. But the thing is that growth always equals pain. And the reason for that, we've been looking at growth equals change. Change equals loss. That's what we're looking at today. Loss equals pain. We'll look at that next week. So long story short, growth equals pain. And everyone likes growth. Everyone likes growth. Man, let's grow. Yes. But then when you start mentioning change, people are iffy on change. Change, I've noticed that change is one of those paradoxes. People want growth, but they don't want the change. They want to already have been at the growth point. But for growth to happen, there has to be some sort of change. And I know that we're all kind of, oh no, I like change. But what we mean to say is, I like change so long as the things that I want changed are changed. When things start changing that I don't want changed, well, I'm not for that. And obviously we all have our mind made up of what those different things that we want changed are and the different things we don't want to happen. But I've noticed that regardless of how you feel towards change, everyone is averse to loss. Everyone. There's not one single person I've ever met that says, yes, loss, sign me up for it. I like getting older and losing my strength. I like having problems with my health. I like these things. I like losing my job. It's wonderful. Nobody says that. I mean, nobody does. We all have an aversion to loss. Think about when we have a loved one that dies and goes to heaven, right? We don't like that. Now, even though it's for their best interest, we don't like that. Why? Because we don't like the loss. It has no difference that they're in a better place. It has to do with I am at a loss. I don't like that. And that's just kind of human nature. We kind of try to hold on to things as long as we can. So let's just kind of summarize up to this point. We're about to look in Numbers. But before we get there, just kind of summarize a couple things. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about God's promise to grow Abram into a nation. This is just some guy out there in the desert, a nobody. He's going to grow him into a nation. So then last week we looked at how he actually did that. He grew Abram into a nation who became the Israelites. Wonderful things. But all that growth and change, all that growth led to them having to change. They had to become a nation. They had to get the law of God. They had to go to a new place, change. And that change led to Numbers. Oh boy, Numbers. Numbers chapter 10, verse 33, verse 11. Through chapter 11, verse 1. They set out from the mountain of the Lord on a 3-day journey, with the ark of the Lord's covenant traveling ahead of them for those 3 days to seek a resting place for them. So this is a good place to be in, right? They're out of slavery. God's walking with them. This sounds like finally we're starting to see something happen. Surely they're going to be happy. We're about to run into them writing a poem or singing a song about how great God is. Surely, right? Because that has to happen. Meanwhile, the cloud of the Lord was over them by day when they set out from the camp. Whenever the ark set out, Moses would say, "Arise, Lord, let your enemies be scattered, and those who hate you flee from your presence." When it came to rest, he would say, "Return, Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." So right there you have God literally directing their steps by visible manifestations. This is an amazing place to be in. New things are happening. They're free from slavery. Man, what an exciting time. Let's hear what song they come up to write to sing of God's goodness. Now the people began complaining openly before the Lord. What? What happened? What in the world happened between point A and point B? They started complaining about hardships. When the Lord heard, his anger burned, and fire from the Lord blazed among them and consumed the outskirts of the camp. Yeah, understandable. I think I'd be a little upset if my kids did that to me. But, you don't like what I cook for dinner, then don't eat at all. No, how does he say on Beauty and the Beast? Then you can starve. And he locks her in the room. You guys have seen the cartoon. Come on. Anyways, so what happened? Well, I would argue what happened I would argue what happened is the loss started to get to them. It wasn't the growth that was bothering them. And the change they were all in favor of at first, hey, we're getting a new law. That's kind of weird. I don't really want to do those things, but whatever. And then you get to the loss. Ooh, I've lost some things. And we're going to look at that. We're going to keep going. But here's the thing. What was the great sin that God was so angry about? Think about this. What was this great, huge sin that caused God to become furious and start burning them? Think about this. It was complaining. It was complaining. That was the great sin. They were complaining about the situation. That blows me away. And especially in Christian culture, we kind of have this thing where we love to talk about how stupid the culture is and how sinful they are. But then we kind of ignore the sin in our own midst. And complaining is one of those things that, well, yeah, it's okay that we do it because, we're Christians. It's kind of like we get a free pass. But then when it comes to talking about the world, oh, they're a bunch of sinners. And yeah, I get what you're saying, but God wasn't burning the whole world for their sin. God was burning his people for their complaining. That really puts things in perspective. And what we do, I know that I do this, and I'm a person, so I'm imagining you do it as well, is we read a passage like this and we say, I would never. I would never do this. Israel is so sinful and wicked and stupid. How stupid of them to do that. But I would never do that. Follow-up question. Have you ever complained about anything at all, ever? Then yeah, you would have done it. Yeah. Because I think if we're honest with ourselves, this is exactly what we do. God will show us his goodness, but then he'll take us into a place that we don't want to be in. First thing we do is complain about it. How could you abandon me, God? How could you put me in this situation? How could you let that person die? How could you let my health degrade? How could you let this happen? You've betrayed me. I put my trust in you and you let me down. We instantly forget. This was the same God who just previously had moved mighty miracles to free them from slavery. And this is their thank you. See, God hadn't failed them. They weren't going through some war. They weren't, it wasn't like the Holocaust or anything. They were just simply out there living in the desert. That was it. That was their great hardship. They were wandering in the desert. To put things in perspective, there's a group of people, substantial amount of group of people, still around the Africa region, the Bedouins and the different nomadic peoples like that, who still live like that. Okay, that was their great trial. They were living like some other people already do live. It had simply been a few months of living in the desert. So let's review what had happened a couple of months before. God brought a man to lead them from slavery. God worked miracles in the land of Egypt. God gave them great wealth from their slavery. And God personally guided them out of Egypt towards the promised land. That's just a little recap of what's happened in a few short months. And here we are, the same year. God, we had it so much better before. So let's go to verse 2 and let's see what progresses. Then the people cried out to Moses, and he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. Okay, do you imagine how odd this is? So God's with them, he's doing mighty things. They start complaining. He starts killing them, and their response is that, and then go to Moses. I could just imagine Moses right now. Leave me out of this, guys. This sounds like a personal issue. You guys need to, what is that shirt that Robert has? Y'all need Jesus. Okay, I didn't do nothing wrong. And that's exactly what's going on here. So who did they go to? They go to the leader. They don't change. They don't repent. They go to Moses. This is exactly the same thing we do today, too, is once again to put it in modern perspective. We also take it to a person instead of the Lord. That's something we still do. We go through a problem, we take it to a person. We're mad, we take it to a person. We're disheartened, we take it to a person. Think of the very nature of a barber. Barber. Hair salonist? Yeah, whatever. When you go and get your hair done, I'm convinced that 90% of the reason why we get our hair done is so that we can tell that person all the things that are bothering us. There's only 10% for hair. But maybe that's because I just buzzed my hair off. I might have had a different perspective if I was if I was a girl. But I assume that that's why people really go to get their hair professionally done. And that's all good and well, but the problem is when instead of taking anything to the Lord, you always have to have your posse, your group of persons in your corner. And you know what I'm talking about too, because the people in your posse will always say something like this. Oh, yeah, they were just so wrong. They really need to change. You need to cut them out of your life, girl. And the thing is, what's bad is when it's you and your spouse, and you guys kind of egg each other on into a bad attitude. You know what I mean? This person will do something, and you'll both get together and start talking about them, how irritating and frustrating it is. Now, I'm married, so I know people do this, so don't look like, I'm married too. I'm alive as well. I am aware of what we as married people do. Hey, this person is on call 24/7 as your personal complaint file directory. So how nice, you don't even have to recap them on what's been going on. They already know. You just say, man, isn't that person stupid? And you already know. So then we go on to chapter, it's still in chapter 11, verse 4. It says, the riffraff among them had a strong craving for other food. Ooh, a really strong craving. And I understand that. Sometimes I get a hankering for Chinese, and I just got to have it. The Israelites wept again and said, who will feed us meat? We have it so hard. Now, with that being said, I genuinely don't understand people who can just eat vegetables, vegetarians and vegans. I don't get it, man. Paul knows what I'm talking about. You know, we got to have our meat. The Israelites wept again and said, who will feed us meat? We remember the free fish we ate in Egypt. Free fish? You guys were slaves. What are you talking about, free fish? We ate in Egypt along with the cucumbers and melons and leeks and onions and garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing to look at but this manna. Nothing. Geez, dramatic much? Then we get down to verse 10 and it says, Moses heard the people, family after family, weeping at the entrance of their tents. They are crying about a burger, guys. They are crying about this. The Lord was very angry, and Moses was also provoked. I like how it words that. Moses was also a little irritated. Oh, you just can't make this stuff up. So what's the issue? What's going on? Because they're going, we have it so hard. Man, I just can't even explain how hard it is. We haven't even seen a steak in a long time. And some people might bring up the argument, well, hold on, didn't they have animals? They led their animals out of Egypt. Well, see, there's a whole different mindset that went back then as from nowadays. Nowadays, we have the mindset of you can just make more. Like, you can just go to Walmart. It doesn't really matter. But these people, those animals were their means of sustenance. If they were to start eating those animals, they wouldn't have anything to shepherd anymore. This was their entire livelihood. Think of it like this. It would be the equivalent of going into your bank account and just taking all of your savings for a meal. Hopefully you wouldn't do that. And that's the exact same idea. Yeah, they did have animals. They could have slaughtered them all and eaten them. However, they would have been in a bit of a pickle. It would have been the ancient equivalent of bankruptcy. So not really the best of options there. So the problem is that they have here is that they simply forgot. They simply forgot what they had gained. And they only focused on the loss. See, do you notice how they worded their complaint? They said, who will feed us meat? We remember the free fish. We remember what we had before we lost it. This is the point of growth that everybody has a problem with. God's growing, things are looking good, a couple changes come, you're like, okay, but nothing I can't handle. And then after those changes come, you start losing something. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Everybody can say, I want to grow, I want the church to grow. Do you still want it to grow when you start losing things that you love? That is the defining line of growth. If you can stick with God through the loss, He'll take you to new places. He was taken to the promised land. They were headed somewhere new. Yeah, absolutely. but they had to go through the loss before they got it. It was a step in the process. So once again, we obviously do the same here. I'm not even going to have to try to argue this. I mean, I was crying about meat just a couple of days ago. I came home and there was no food, and I said, Gracie, I'm going to starve. I thought you loved me. Can't we have some steak? Rolling on the ground. Ah. Mike and Teresa joined me. We're rolling. Ah. I'm joking. But I noticed how you guys held your breath. You're like, is he joking or is he serious? So what did they gain? What are these great gains that they were forgetting? Well, actually, quite a few of them. They gained freedom. That's pretty amazing. They gained free food. Think about this. They were getting free food that literally fell out of the sky. They didn't have to plant seed. They didn't have to harvest. They didn't have to gather. Well, they did have to gather, but it was on the ground, so they just went outside and picked it up. Not really gathering. When I'm thinking gathering, I'm thinking of like, let's go search and see if we can find some berries or nuts. They weren't doing that. It was just right outside. They walk outside and they pick it up. I mean, this is the closest thing. This is like God's personal Walmart to Israel. They didn't have to go real far to get this. But that even was detestable. That God, how could you possibly hate us so much that you would divinely give us food from the sky? You must really hate us. And I'm convinced that anytime we have ungratefulness in our heart and complaining and nitpicking, it's because we're not looking at the amazing miracles that God is doing in our lives. Because you will always have something in your life to complain about. Always. There's always going to be something. In many cases, there's going to be a bunch of somethings. In many cases, those bunches of somethings are going to happen at the exact same time. And yet, there will always be something to be thankful for. And I've heard this countless times. This is what people say. I genuinely don't have anything to be thankful for. Well, then you genuinely are not paying attention. Because there's always something genuinely to be thankful for. Always. But we do the exact same thing. We focus on the loss instead of the gains. God, look what I've lost. How could you abandon me so? I'll use an example of my whatever you want to call it, disease. When I got it, oh God, I've lost my strength. The strength of my youth, and I'm only in my 30s. How can I possibly keep this together? I'm no good to anybody. I'll never be able to be, to do this, any big things for you. I'll never be able to go back to biking 100 miles in a day. I'll never be able to go to that. I'm a fallen man. A little dramatic, but that's what we do in our heads. We get alone with our own thoughts, and we just kind of go to drama land. I think that's why we like TV so much. But in all of that, there were so many different things to be thankful for. One of the things that I could have been thankful for is the way that God saw me through. I had to go through it. That was scary, but He didn't abandon me. We think sometimes when we have to go through it that He abandoned us. No, not at all. It was just uncomfortable. And that, I think, is what's happening here. It was uncomfortable for Israel. They had to eat the same thing over and over again. And I get it. I do not like eating the same thing over and over again. Unless it's pizza. Pizza gets a free pass. Everything else, I do not like eating over and over again. And I think most people are like that. Except for my wife. When we first got married, she was like, oh, we used to have this every day. And I'm just like, why would you do that? My mom is spaghetti and tacos. That's all she ever did. If people like that, hey, whatever. Just for me, it's like, oh, man. I'd rather just not eat at all. I'll starve. So what else did they have that they gained? They gained God in their very presence. Imagine this. God is walking with them, giving them visible manifestations of His presence. And they're still complaining. They also had a leader who cared. He didn't just drag them out into the desert and kill Moses. He could have done that. But He didn't. Think about that. Every moment you have with somebody is a blessing. Something to be thankful for. And what they had was Moses. But instead of being thankful for Moses, they go and talk to Moses instead of to God. We remember. What are you remembering, though? And I just want to give you a little heads up in your own life. Because I want you to remember this, okay? Whenever God brings new in your life, Satan will always remind you of the old. He'll remind you of better days. He'll remind you of when you had that thing that you lost, when you had that person that you lost. He'll do that. That's Satan's arena. He loves that. He loves taking the joy of what God does in the new and the now, and instead making you look backwards and saying, oh, but what about back then? I had it so much better. When I was a kid, man, things were really... And I think part of that is because we get attached and we want to relive the past over and over again. How many times have you said, back in my day, in the good old days, back in, and everybody says some kind of variation to it. And we all have it. I mean, it's not something that just the old people do. It's something that everybody does. We always have that golden era in our life. You start having that golden era when you're a teenager, and it just gets worse and worse the older you get. You always are going to have a time in your life. Okay, and part of that is in your head. They did a study and found out that your taste in music is pretty much solidified in your younger years. So when you get older, it's only natural to say back and then because your brain has a preference for it. So we get attached and want to keep reliving the path. But here's the thing. Growth equals change, and change equals loss. You can't keep reliving the past. And I'm going to give you a couple examples. And the idea here is that growth has a price tag. Okay? I'm going to give you a couple examples. As a church grows, the pastor starts pastoring leaders instead of people, and the leaders pastor the people. You see this happen in the book of Numbers. In the book of Exodus. Moses is trying to pastor all the people. And his father-in-law says, it's not a good way to do that. How about you get these leaders, and they're going to take care of that? How about you do that? Kind of share the load. And it was a great idea. And that's the thing, is as churches grow, the pastor is no longer the one personally talking with each person. In fact, sometimes pastors don't even know the people. I want to challenge you to go down to Church on the Move, a huge church. You will probably not have a personal relationship with the senior pastor. That's probably not going to happen because they've grown. Smaller churches have a more intimate relationship with their pastor. That's how it works. And everybody wants to grow, but how much growth do you want? Do you want to grow to the point where you no longer get to talk to me? Where you have to talk to somebody under me? See what I mean? That's a loss that you would have to experience. And that begs the question, how much growth do you really want? Eventually, one day you're going to wake up. As the church grows, eventually you're going to wake up one day and you're going to say this isn't the church I once knew. I don't know the people. I don't know the programs. I miss that. I miss this. The pastor used to go to everything. Well, in larger churches, the pastor doesn't go to everything. Those are a lot of changes that are hard to internalize. So what a lot of people do is they just keep moving to small churches. Other people, they just kind of roll with it, and they go to big churches and get lost in the crowd. It's where we all find ourselves. But that is the price tag of growth. As you grow, you lose something. So growth definitely has a price tag. For Israel, the price tag for their growth was slavery. It was suffering. It was wandering in the desert. For you, you're going to have your own price tag that you're going to have to pay for growth. Because you will have to grow, and this church will have to grow. But for that growth, there will be a price tag. Maybe it might be the loss of what is familiar to you. Maybe it might be the loss of what you loved. I can't speak for you. I can only speak for myself. We would rather, though, stick with a broken system than get a new one. You know what I mean? It's a lot harder to adapt to something new. I'll prove it in just a few. Two examples will prove it. My phone. My phone is old and outdated, but I refuse to get a new one because it still works. And I'm going to suck every penny that I spent on that phone. Have you ever done that before? I mean, I don't even bother asking. I already have seen some of you guys with flip phones, okay? I know what it's like. I get it. I'm not judging you. I'm just agreeing with you. I get it. You want to stay with something, even if the old thing's broken, you'd rather do that than get a new one. Here's another example, your computer. Do you know how difficult it is to get a new operating system? Oh, and then you have to learn all the things. And don't even get me started switching between PC and Mac. It's like learning a whole different language. But isn't the new one better? Well, yeah, but then I got to change it and learn it. I know me. I did not upgrade from Windows 7 for a very long time because I really liked Windows 7. And I would rather stick with an old, broken thing that was not getting updated than switch to the new. That's how we work. Israel's complaining about being set free because they lost something. Amazing. And change definitely does equal the loss of what we know. Change means the loss of what we know. And that's two things to this, okay? First off, change is a critique of the past. When something is changing, you're saying, this is how it was done back then, and that's not good enough for today. This is how we did it then. I'll give you an example right off the top of my head. Remember when we used to have those other projectors, not these ones, the ones that were on the ground and you put the slides in front of them? I don't remember what they were called, but you guys remember, right? And you could always see the person's fingers on them. Do you remember that? And they always had to like stand up here awkwardly in the front, switching the slides while they're singing. You guys remember that, right? We used to have organs, now we have guitars and stuff. Change. It was a critique of the past. It worked good then. Let's try something else now. But change is also more than that. Change is an analysis of the future. Think of driving. Growth is like driving a car. There is a huge brick wall coming up. You can either run into that brick wall full force, or you can stop the car or turn the car. Growth is seeing that there's a need and reacting to it. There's a wall coming up. We need to change course. Unfortunately, what you see happening in the church nationwide is churches would rather stick with the same systems until they literally die. So you have the growth of an organization and then the slow decline and death of that organization. Why? It's not because the people don't love God. It's not because they weren't dedicated to God. It's not because they didn't read their Bibles. It's because they just didn't want to change. They weighed the cost, and they said, it's too much. I would rather this church die out than have to do the changes necessary to reach new people. I like our systems. I like what we have. I don't want to change it. It happens. Once again, it happens. So now we get to chapter 12. And you'd think, okay, well, they just had a hiccup. They had to get the complaining out of their system. Oh, but wait. There's more. Verse 1, Miriam and Aaron, who are the top leaders next to Moses. I mean, these three people pretty much, not to say ran everything, but they were real high up the chain. They said, does the Lord speak only through Moses? Does he not also speak through us? And the Lord heard it. Which I always feel like that's a bad thing to hear of the Lord, that he heard it. So here you have the expression of growth. So the way you can tell that God is growing Israel is because people are not liking it. Whenever there's growth, there's always dissent. Because there's some people who want to stay right here, and there's some people who want to go up there. That's human nature. I mean, think of your families, right? And so you have them nitpicking and transferring their misery. Well, I'm not happy. I don't like the losses that are happening, so now I'm taking it out on you. And then you have spiritual arrogance. Man, we're just as holy as Moses. The issue wasn't who was holy or who was not holy. God appointed Moses to lead Israel. It was not an issue of who was holy or who was not holy, especially since Leviticus said, to be holy as I am holy. Holiness is not the issue. But Miriam and Aaron, they can't roll with the changes. And you hear people say something similar to what Miriam and Aaron said back then. Well, I don't submit to people, I submit to God. Like that somehow makes us more spiritual. Do you remember in the book of Daniel how they address the king? They bow before him and they call him my Lord. And that's from the book of Daniel, so probably a good example there. So then you get to chapter 14, and you see this. Then the whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron. And the whole community told them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. See, Moses was a blessing until change happened, and then he was a curse. It wasn't even his fault either. He's just leading the people. God's the one doing all the stuff. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? So they said to one another, hey, that's a good idea. Let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. Right, because if they had only had a leader, they wouldn't have been in this pickle. Oh, wait, they did have a leader. But the leader wanted to move them forward, and they wanted to go back. See, this is the defining line of growth. We all say we want to growth. We all want to grow, but growth means loss. Do you want the loss? Are you going to accept the pain that comes from the growth? And also we see here the rejection of human authority is very much so related to rejection of God. God has not appointed us to point out all the stupid things that our state leaders do and our national leaders do. He has appointed us to pray for them. He has appointed us to pray for them. Literally appointed us. That is a task he has set before us. Let us not shirk away from it. So then we get down here, and we get to verse 30. This is God speaking now. This is in response to their 15th time of having a hissy fit. I swear that none of you will enter the land I promised to settle you in, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. When Moses reported these words to all the Israelites, the people were overcome with grief. They got up early the next morning saying, hey, let's go to the place the Lord promised, for we were wrong. We're the bigger person. We can say this. We were wrong. Except they still didn't get the issue because they're still disagreeing with God. God says go, they say no. He says, okay, don't go. They say no. They're still have not come to a place of repenting and changing. They want to do the same stupid thing they've been doing in Egypt in the new land. And God's saying, nope. Now it's going to go on to your kids. The ones that you were afraid were going to die, yeah, those are the ones that are going to inherit it. And you're the ones who are going to die in the wilderness. We're going to flip things around on you. And the thing is, when you get into this kind of a place in your head, it doesn't matter, you're going to go against it. This is a place called being a hard-hearted. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever it is, you're against it. I thought I wanted change, but now this is too big of change. I thought I wanted growth, but the loss is just too great. I can't handle this. No matter what it is, you're against it. And you see it happen in a lot of different places, but I think I'd like to use the example of an atheist. Most arguments with atheists are pretty pointless because they've already decided what they're going to believe. So you argue and you argue, doesn't get anywhere. And then you walk away feeling real discouraged. Well, what's the issue? The issue is that it's called being hard-hearted. Well, if God would personally come to me, he knows what would get me saved. He would just personally come to me. Well, actually, if the law and the prophets weren't enough for you, and Jesus Christ himself being raised from the dead and leaving an empty tomb that caused people such a surety of their hope that they literally died because they knew what the truth was, if that's not enough for you, nothing will. And the bad thing is when we as Christians get into that same place where no longer is it good enough. We become hard-hearted and say, no, it doesn't matter. I've made up my mind. I'm not willing to change. I'm not willing to go there. And that's exactly what Israel's doing. You've promised something better over there, just over this stream. I'm not willing to take that step. I'm comfortable here. Whatever it is, I'm against it. And so some of us have the idea that, well, if I say or do the right thing, I'll be able to convince somebody to turn to God. I was actually just talking with a woman this week who was explaining that one of her friends had become an atheist, and that atheist was dying. And she tried to preach at her, she tried to correct her, she tried to anything to bring it in. Prayer, anything to get this woman to change. And she said with tears in her eyes, she said, I just really thought I could change them. I just really thought I could convince them. Hard-heartedness. It's never enough. There will never be enough to sway you. And I would like to encourage you to take a moment in your heart and say, if God asked me to give up and pick out whatever the thing is you love the most, it could be health, people you love, something in the church that you love, health, I already said that, I think, friends, whatever it is that might be the thing that you love most, ask yourself in your heart, if he's asked me to give this up, would I? Or would I walk away and say, no, I'm not willing to make that? And that is if you know that you're going to be able to grow or not. Because this is what happens anytime that a church grows. Everybody clamors for growth. We need to grow. Everybody does it. And then growth starts happening. And when it starts happening, you find people don't even get on the bus. They let it go by. They complain for a while. And then they leave the church and they say, that church they just changed. They don't love God anymore. They're not willing to. No. It happens every single time. And people are always surprised by it. But I'm telling you, it'll happen here too. There's going to be some things that happen that press you, and you're not going to like it. They're going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to like it. Are you willing to change through those things or not? Because it will happen. Whatever it is, it will happen. And the thing is, we always get in our heads, well, I'll just stay here. You can't stay here. You're either changing or you're going backwards. That's the only options left. You are changing or you're going backwards. Just like with Israel. You're changing or you're going backwards. Unfortunately, they continually harden their heart. And here's the funny thing. You remember the promises we looked at 2 weeks ago from Genesis 12? I'm going to grow you into a nation. You're going to bless all the nations. Great things, right? Well, here we are, and we are left with one simple conclusion. The people simply do not care about growth at this point. They don't care about growth anymore. They care about the loss. We want the blessings of Genesis 12, but at this point, they didn't care about the journey anymore. They wanted to already have been at their goal of having. Well, maybe we could ask a question. Were they doing what they set out to do? Isn't this exactly what the goal was at the start of Exodus? Yes, this is exactly what they had set out to do. But the loss got to them. Let's look at Ecclesiastes. Let's look what it says. Don't say, why were the former days better than these, since it is not wise of you to ask this. Another translation says like this, it is foolish to say the good old days. And it's the same thought. We had it so much better back then. And what does Ecclesiastes say of that kind of a thought? It's foolish. What a foolish thing to do. It's in the past, gone. You can't have it back by wishing. There's a lot of moments in my life that I like to go back to. And I wish I didn't have to go through so much loss. But through the loss, I grew. Your life will never be satisfied in this. You will never be satisfied completely in this life. You will either want this or you're going to want that. Before you grow, you're going to want growth. After you grow, you're going to want what you had. It will always happen. You have to choose to accept where you are and choose to accept where God has placed you and what He's given you for the time being. And enjoy what you have while you have it. Enjoy it while you have it. The simplest of the easiest of things. If you are able to go to bed each night with your spouse, you are blessed. You are blessed. Growth is a process that inevitably leads to loss. It's true for churches, it's true for business, it's true for family, it's true for you, and it's true for your faith too. If you want to grow in your faith, if you want the church to grow, you're going to have to go through a series of loss. And eventually you will wake up and you will say, I don't even know this church anymore. So what can you take away from this? Well, there's two things I'd like to mention, okay? So if you're going to have growth one way or another, because God's not going to leave you where you are. He takes you where you are, but He doesn't leave you there. So if He's going to grow you, then that means you are going to have change in your life. And if you're going to have change, that means you're going to have loss. And with loss two things. Number one, with loss, you have to learn deeper trust in God. The faith that Israel had in slavery was not enough in the Promised Land. You're going to go through loss of health, loss of loved ones. You're going to lose the America you used to know. It's going to happen. Why? Because the Bible says so. Things are going to get worse, not better. You are going to lose the America you love. It's going to be painful. You're going to see America continually to get wicked, more and more wicked. You're going to see it. And there's going to be nothing you can do to stop it. Because they have hardened their heart. That is what's going to happen. If the Bible says so, there's no reason to argue with it anymore. And you're not going to like it when it happens. It's going to be a loss of something you loved. But here's the thing. With that loss, you have to learn deeper trust in God. It was easier before. It's going to get harder in the future. To be a Christian, to stand for God, you're going to have deeper trust when we get there. Maybe you're going to have the loss of a job. Israel had to trust with the land, the food, the battles, but they wouldn't. We're going to come to future places in our own life as a nation, as a church. We're going to come to similar places. We have to learn a deeper trust. The second thing with loss. With loss, you have to focus on gains. You have to, or you will be overcome. The only way is to focus on the gains. What made the early church able to withstand when they lost everything by turning to Jesus? What was it? Because they said that what they gained was worth more than whatever they lost. The longer you live, the more the losses build in you. They're like weights. And you will either be overcome by those weights, and you will turn your heart, or you will rejoice in the gains that you have. But one thing you can definitely be sure of is when you come to a place of being never satisfied, you will never be satisfied with what you got. Because there will always be something to be disappointed about. So let's go to prayer. Lord, we pray whatever you want for this church. God, we pray whatever you want for this church. God, we pray whatever you want for our lives. God, we pray whatever you want in our families, in our jobs, in the church, in America. Let it be your will, God, and not mine. Whatever you want. You have appointed our days before us, God. Whatever you want. That we would wait patiently on you. Lord, whatever you want for Roswell. Lord, I pray that you would speak to our hearts and make us be a light. That we would shine in the middle of the darkness. Not that we would find refuge from the darkness, but there would be a light in the darkness. Even as your word says, that you came as a light to the world. And the world hated it because they didn't understand it. Lord, build in us a fire that would make us a light. That we would also follow your image. And become a light to our community, a light to our world, a light to one another. Lord, thank you for the body of believers that we have shared faith, shared goals, that you would strengthen them. You would turn their hearts, that they would want higher things. That, Lord, the things that we want today, that you would change and improve them, that we would want more of you tomorrow. That we wouldn't be stuck, Lord, but that we want more of you. And we love you, Lord.